Brockside is probably the best kept secret in Lancashire, if you ignore the wife swapper's dungeon in Singleton, a glorious ramble along the River Brock, particularly picturesque in the autumn when the trees seem to be on fire with all their golden and orange leaves. Unfortunately, apart from a few attractive Georgian houses, I wouldn't say no, and an old paper mill that we didn't actually reach, there's no actual history here as such, which is why I'm being all poetic at the moment, in a pathetic attempt to flesh this film out. This is Borough, of course, where I was born and raised and have spent the majority of my life, and even I didn't realise that Brockside was here until me and Jeanie McIntosh stumbled across it the other day. We do a lot of stumbling across stuff these days. I blame it on my gout and Jeanie McIntosh's Zimmer frame. Jeanie McIntosh, incidentally, was born in Tooting, London, where Citizen Smith comes from, so you'll just have to forgive her, really. There's a bridge in the centre of what is ostensibly a hamlet, but is more actually just a bridge. There are some black sheep in the field next to it, possibly for making donkey jackets out of. On the west side of the bridge, it's called New Bridge on the map, probably because it was once. There's a winding road running parallel to the river, heading off in the general direction of the Lancaster Canal, and some interesting rapids and stuff, with a memorial to Michael Fox, presumably not the same one from Back to the Future, although with time travel anything's possible. Brock, incidentally, is the old-fashioned rural name for a badger, hence the rather badly drawn emblem of the Brockholes family that appears on quite a few properties in the area. To be honest, we thought it was a deformed pig. On the east side of Newbridge, the footpath runs through seemingly endless serpentine miles of excellent wire countryside, past a smattering of old cotton mills or barn conversions or something, and stone-built cottages with ha-has and ho-hos, through adder-thick meadows where open-toed sandals are probably a bad idea, and up into the fells where it meets the long-abandoned ruins of Brock Mill and the sketchy outlines of the village that once surrounded it. We didn't walk that far, we're old biddies. Instead we trampled some mud back into the car and ate our Hazlitt butties. Or at least I did. Jeanie McIntosh had never tasted Hazlitt before. She took one sniff of my sarnie and decided, against all logic, that she couldn't stand it. Bloody cockneys. So we went to nearby Claughton-on-brock instead. Pronounced Clyton by the locals apparently, but we're sticking with our mispronunciation. There's not much at Claughton, to be honest. It could barely be classified as a village unless you count the ducks as residents. Owen Oyston, former millionaire majority owner of Blackpool Football Club, convicted of indecently assaulting a 16-year-old girl back in 1996, owns Claughton Hall, which we couldn't film because he'd hidden it from reporters behind some trees, so we had to make do with his gatehouse instead. Or at least he did own it a few years back. We couldn't be bothered conducting any further research to find out if he still does. The original hall was built around 1600, pulled down and rebuilt in the Victorian period, then pulled down again and rebuilt in the Barratt home style because historic planning regulations don't seem to apply to extremely rich people. There were obviously earlier occupants on the estate before that, as testified by the Viking burial mound dug through by workers in 1822. In said mound was a clay pot, now lost, containing cremation ashes, 2 tortoiseshell brooches that locked together to form a box containing 2 beads, one red, one blue, a bit like the pills in the Matrix, and somebody's tooth. Don't ask, we don't know either. The brooch and the beads are now on permanent display in the Harris Museum. Also in the aforementioned mound was a small silver brooch, a Bronze Age hammerhead, an equally Bronze Age axe and spearhead, and an almost certainly Bronze Age sword. Most of the latter objects nowadays, like the burial urn, lost to posterity, or stupidity. A number of suggestions have been put forward over the decades as to how 2 such distinct time periods came to be represented in the same tumulus, but they're not particularly interesting, so if you're that bothered, you can look them up for yourself on the internet. Claughton's also got an ancient cross. Actually, it's got a few of them, but we didn't learn about the others until we got home, so this was the only one we filmed. the base of which dates back to medieval times. The rest of it was stuck up, or restored if you believe the inscription, by William Fitzherbert Brockholes in 1920 as a First World War memorial, dedicated to the two sons he lost. The cross shaft is based on a Celtic design from a Lancaster churchyard. It's got a dragon on it. There's a church in Claughton, just the one as far as we can tell. St Thomas the Apostle it's called. They were holding confessions there at 6:30 p.m. that evening. Not being Catholic, I've never been to confession. I'm currently working on a 16-volume autobiography to take with me on my next visit. Apparently the church dates back to the 14th century, although there's bugger all left of that particular version. The early chapel allegedly stood in a dense wood near the aforementioned Viking barrow. A friendly bloke, I'm not sure if he was a priest or what, with an acorn cup on his head, told me and Jeanie McIntosh that St Thomas's was rebuilt in the Georgian period, designed to resemble an ordinary barn because of the ongoing Catholic persecution. Obviously the Pope had a different idea of what a barn looks like than most of the local farmers. The inside of the church looks more like the Tower Ballroom, to be honest, in that subtle, understated way that Catholics have with interior decor. Apparently a lot of houses around Claughton, although to be honest we could only find about 3, are much older than they look and contain priest holes. Whether the same could be said of the Catholic primary school, we couldn't honestly say. I've never really understood why religions need their own schools when we have a standardised educational syllabus in this country. Presumably they have extra lessons in guilt or after-school workshops for potential strippers. We found one of the school's ex-teachers in the graveyard. Esther Cockshoot she was called. I bet she was popular with the kids. When we got home, Michelle did some research and discovered that we'd missed tons of stuff, so we'll probably have to go back again at some point in the not too distant future. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and try to join us again for the next episode.